What's going on, everybody? It's your Route 1 Encounter Yubari Eradicate here on episode 3 of the Design Dex series. Today we are covering Pokemon 7 through 10, who are, of course, the Squirtle evolutionary line, our first water starters, and Pokemon that, I don't know a whole lot about. I'm going to try not to repeat myself too much from the hour that I spent talking about Blastoise in the only absurdly popular video on my channel. For those of you who don't know, if you're new, just finding this episode, if Squirtle's your favorite starter, like he is mine for Gen 1, this is a series where I'm going to go through every Pokemon in the Dex. We're up to 890, and I believe this Thursday, as of the time of this recording, I think we're getting a new mythical Pokemon revealed. And of course, that's not including the Isle of Armor and the Crown Tundra DLC, which will be adding new Pokemon as well. But I'm going to be going through every Pokemon in the Pokedex and talking about their designs and why I think they're successful or unsuccessful, what I like about them, what I dislike about them, and my history with the Pokemon and all that sort of stuff. And any kind of interesting trivia that I happen to come across. Things like I mentioned in the last video with Charizard previously having a prototype female version. For example, in these Pokemon, Wartortle there was a Gen 4 prototype or beta sprite leak a little while back, and it revealed a couple of gender differences where it seemed like they were going to go really hard in that generation and try to give every Pokemon a gender difference. And I don't think Squirtle or Blastoise had much going on, but I know that Wartortle had shorter ears in those sprites, which wasn't much, which is probably why they cut it, because it would have been a lot of work just for that, But that's kind of the point of this series. One thing I wanted to mention here that I don't think I've actually changed it yet on this drawing, but I actually, from memory, so I do a from memory sketch and then a reference drawing as well. This is an art series primarily. I'm not going to talk too much about the in-game stuff, but I thought it was funny that I drew the square kneecap pad thingies on Blastoise over here. And the reason that's funny to me is because that's how he looks in Pokken. And so that's what my brain remembered, I guess. Even though other than that, and then when I do the full drawing, I gave him a longer tail than normal. But other than that, I kept him pretty on model to how he normally looks. This is a quick little color fill thing, just real quick to show that I remember what colors they have. Squirtle's eyes, I was uncertain about because I vaguely remember, I could have sworn as a kid that he had brown eyes in the anime and stuff like that. Maybe he does. I didn't actually go and look at the anime. But I looked through his sprites and his the 3D model from the newer games, and in Gen 1, obviously, he didn't have, there's no, there's just the whatever default color. So he was all blue in Gen 1, or gray, whatever. In Gen 2, he had brown eyes, but I assume that's because of, the pixel, the palette limitations, where you could only have certain amounts of colors in the game. But from Gen 3 onward, he has the kind of red-maroon sort of eyes going on. But yeah, that's one of those ones I could have sworn. One, I guess, I'll mention it now, but misremembering Pokemon, I always think that Mawile used to be a dark type, even though it wasn't, which is really bizarre. But every once in a while, there's those things that I'm certain I remember, but I'm just completely off on. I will try to make corrections in the future if I get anything wrong or if I miss things. In the first video, I missed the gender difference on female
Mm-hmm.
Venusaur. Has a little extra flower thing. I also tried to keep note of who designed what Pokemon. I believe Ken Sugimori was responsible for these three. I'm guessing he was responsible for at least two of them because if anybody follows Dr. Lava's Lost Pokemon that I mentioned in the last video, you're probably familiar with the original evolution line where there was a different final evolution that looked like a big Wartortle. It was basically a mix between Wartortle and Nidoking is what it kind of looked like based on the back sprite that they had. The artist that kind of did an approximation of what it would have looked like. It looked like a Nidoking kind of like a generic or a Rhydon, I guess, kind of more appropriate, but just a pretty generic like pocket monster kind of creature that looked like a big Wartortle. Blastoise was previously the stage 1 evolution of a different Pokemon, which was like it was a little baby Blastoise with like a bubble coming out of its nose, and it had little barnacles on its shoulders that I guess would become its water cannons. And so that kind of explains why Blastoise has the water cannons and why he doesn't have the same tail and ear kind of situation that Wartortle has. As much as I like Blastoise, I do think it would have been better to have the other one. I don't think that the other one would have been nearly as popular, which is, good on them for recognizing that Blastoise was a better design overall, with more staying power, for sure. But, at the same time, you never know. If that thing had been on the cover of Pokemon Blue back in the day, it could have been popular. Like I mentioned before, Charizard is not like the most creative, incredible design in the universe, but it's still very popular, and I assume a lot of that is because it was on the cover of a game, and it had a rare Pokemon card, Well, I don't know if it was rare back in the day, but, it became rare over time. Squirtle himself, there's not a whole lot to say about his overall design. One thing of note is that a couple of Pokemon, especially in Gen 1, it's very prevalent in Gen 1 that Pokemon will have extra or less digits on their hands or feet than they currently do. Such as when we get to Pidgey, I'll mention that Pidgey used to have 2 toes and now he has 3. I think Dodrio and Zapdos also are a lot of birds in Gen 1 that used to have less toes that have more toes now. And previously I mentioned how Charmander had little thumbnails instead of just regular little thumbs like the rest of his fingers. And occasionally he'll have 3 fingers or 4 fingers depending on who's drawing him where. Which is really bizarre to me that they don't all just like... Because if I were working on an official Pokemon thing, in any official capacity, I would be like obsessively just staring at reference sheets, making sure I didn't mess anything up. But when you're on a time limit, I guess maybe I don't know exactly how it happens. I don't know the inner workings. I've never worked in this industry, but yeah, it is bizarre to me. But Squirtle has maintained 3 fingers, 3 toes. His little club tail. His eyes have been pretty much the same throughout his entire lifetime. So he's a pretty consistent little dude. And I think it's because they got him right the first time, and there wasn't a whole lot of work that needed to be done. Right there, I tried adding the sclera, because he has that in his art, but I don't know. It just from a front-facing view, it kind of just looked right without them, so I left it how it was. Squirtle is also these 3 are funny because Squirtle is the tiny turtle Pokemon, which is accurate. He is a tiny turtle. Wartortle is known as the turtle Pokemon. And then Blastoise, of course, being the end of this evolutionary line, is the shellfish Pokemon. Gen 1 has a lot of strange designation issues like that, where Raticate is the mouse Pokemon, and what's the other one? Oh, Slowbro is the hermit crab Pokemon. So I think there was a little bit of translation errors happening in Gen 1, sort of before they had things figured out. That's why a lot of people, as a little aside, a lot of people I know like to talk trash about Gen 2, about Silver and Gold. But I like Silver and Gold because they feel like a fully realized version of the original vision of this series. And just like I went back and played Silver again recently. I'm still kind of like, going through it. But I was actually really surprised how much Steel and Dark type add to the formula. And I was actually thinking today about how much Fairy adds and how I'm at the point where I don't think we need another type. I would have said that back in Gen 5 as well. But I think that where we're at now with 16 typings is like... I was trying to think of like what else could we need, and I couldn't really come up with anything. So, I don't know. If you guys think we could use another typing, go ahead and let me know in the comments down below. But I did some little fades here because this video was too long before, and so I trimmed 20 minutes out of it. You're welcome, I guess. I'm actually really, really happy with how Squirtle came out. I made him a little wider than he actually is, and I did the same thing with Wartortle here, you'll see. But I thought it was fine because, turtles are kind of wide when you look at them from the bottom like that, and I don't know, I thought he was cute. I got him his little Ginyu pose, just because, I don't know, it felt appropriate. I was thinking about Squirtle Squad, and I was like, yeah, you know what, he should be doing a little pose. You saw it might have been hard to see through all the fades there, but and I apologize. But I was trying to do a pose for Wartortle where he was tail whipping, basically, because my favorite Wartortle has become one of my favorite Pokemon, which is odd because I mentioned previously how I had never really given much thought or appreciation toward the middle evolutions of any of the starter lines. Except for Charmeleon, I always thought was kind of cool, but he was also overshadowed by Charizard being in front of him and Charmander being behind him. I think that's how they all kind of are. But Wartortle in particular, I didn't like. Like Wartortle and Ivysaur, I was averse to entirely. It wasn't even a matter of like indifference. It was I just didn't like them. It wasn't until pretty recently, like a couple of years ago, I did a poll on Twitter that all my the Pokken friends mostly responded to, where I was asking for everybody's favorite starter. I was asking what they think the best starter is and what their favorite starter was. And I think I did that for all three of each thing. I might be misremembering this poll, but I think it was something along those lines. And I remember seeing a lot of people being like, yeah, Wartortle's my favorite. And I remember being confused because I was like, but Wartortle sucks. And they're like, no, go look at Wartortle. Wartortle's great. And I was like, all right, I'll go look at him. And so I sat there for like an hour while I was not working at my job. And I don't work at that job anymore, by the way. But I sat there and I stared at him for like an hour. And I went, you know what? Wartortle is a cool little guy, actually. He's actually really great. And especially once when Pokemon Go did the community day, I got like 5 shiny Squirtles, and so I have a shiny Wartortle and a shiny Blastoise that I'm actually using in Sword and Shield right now. But Wartortle, he really grew on me, and a lot of what I like about him is his tail, because Squirtle's got his little club tail and it's cute. His little like squirrel tail? Maybe. Squirtle has his little club tail, and then Wartortle has this big flowing fluffy tail, which I actually when I was like resting before I started recording this, and so I was like, let me actually go look and read a little bit more about these three than not at all. There isn't really much trivia on Blastoise, but I did find that Wartortle is apparently based off of a creature called a Minogame, I think, or Minokame, something like that. It is a Minogame. Minogame is a turtle which lived for 10,000 years, and it lived so long that it grew a tail of seaweed off of its shell. Apparently that is the deal with Wartortle. And I also saw something about him storing... They store oxygen in their tail fibers, I guess. was what I thought I saw. Which the Bulbapedia says could be a reference to how certain species of turtles, can breathe through their cloaca. And I was like, I don't like that shit. I'm not a fan of cloaca. Anytime cloacas come up, I'm like, no, get that shit away from me. Cut that freaky shit out, Animal Kingdom, please. But yeah, I really do like his big fluffy tail. Although I'm not exactly sure how it works, because one issue I had drawing it both times I attempted was that it's because it's such a specific shape when it's upright, like it is most of the time. Whenever it sort of relaxes, or if it were straight out or whatever, it's because it's like weird hair, I guess. It's not like a fin. I think it's hair. But it's just sort of like I have a hard time wrapping my head around how it actually like rests. You know what I mean? But I like the color of it a lot too. It's sort of Brion's a long way off, but I'll mention it once we get there in a couple of years. I like Brion a lot actually from the Primarina line, and part of why I like it is just that it's specific colors. I just like its color of blue a lot. And it's sort of the same deal with Wartortle. I think that the blue ears and the blue tail break up his otherwise darker colors, which is visually appealing to me. I also like that Wartortle's head looks like a little Paragoomba. And I think that might have been why I didn't care for him much as a kid. Because I actually didn't like Goombas a lot as a kid either from Mario, which is crazy to think about because now I love Goombas. I have a Goomba amiibo. I love Goombas so much, and especially Paragoombas, and especially the red ones because they just look so pissed. I love them, and that's what I love about Wartortle now is that he looks like a little Paragoomba. He's got the little blush, he's got the fangs and the ears, and he just looks so pissed and tough. And his name's Wartortle. He's a war turtle, a warrior turtle. And he just looks like if these weren't starters, and if he were just if he were the final stage of his evolution, I'd be like, yeah, sure, dude. Like, he looks like he looks like he'd kick your ass, especially with how tough the Squirtle Squad actually is. They're all pretty capable despite being a bunch of little baby turtles. So this dude would, he'd fold you. He'd fold you like nothing, like a fucking menu. But, yeah. I mean, I don't know. There isn't really much else to say about Wartortle. Other than, I do like his darker colors. It's strange to me that his eyes turn brown after Squirtle. Squirtle's got his red eyes, and I think that would have looked cool in Wartortle. I should do an alternate color or something for Wartortle. I was thinking about doing the shinies for these because that's easy. I just have to go, mess with hue and saturation on all these. But I don't know. Maybe I'll get around to it later. Maybe I'll do that as a bonus for Twitter because I did actually start a Design Dex Twitter account just for uploading these, and whenever I draw Pokemon, I figured it'd be fun to have all the my Pokemon content on a separate account that's easy to access because I draw a lot of different stuff on my art account, and this way it would let me kind of consolidate all this stuff so that my followers from my main that only give a shit about Pokemon can just follow the Pokemon account, So I'll leave a link to that in the description. If I remember to do that, because I think I said that about the last one, and I think I forgot, because I'm really bad at descriptions. Especially YouTube's new layout. Oh boy, don't even get me started on YouTube. Anyway, it's a good thing I don't upload very often, or I'd be really frustrated, Anyway, though, I was going to mention how you might have noticed I upped the saturation on my reference images up top. That's because I don't know why... But Sugimori's artwork, his official artwork for all the Pokemon, has been very desaturated. I think it's always been like that. I think even in Gen 4, Gen 4 is like my because I had in Gen 1 I had the like Pokedex books that I got from like the Scholastic School Fair or whatever. And those had the I don't remember if it had the watercolor. I don't think it had the watercolor art, and I think they had like the really shitty like anime promotional images. Which that's another one of the War Turtle trivias is that in a lot of promotional imagery for the anime, his ears were the same color as his skin, and they kind of like blended in like they were just like skin ears. It's very creepy, and I don't like it. But I had those books, and then I had the ones for Gen 2. And I think I had the Ruby Sapphire ones somewhere, but I remember them only having the Ruby Sapphire Pokemon or something. I remember they were like incomplete or something. And I didn't like it, so I didn't use them very much. But then I remember they put out a strategy guide for Diamond and Pearl, and that thing was massive, and it had maps for everything in the game, and it had like items, and it had every single Pokemon. It had all 400 and whatever Pokemon there were at that point. It didn't go up to Arceus. It did that annoying thing that whole generation did, where it cut out like the last 3 mythical, where it's like Manaphy, Darkrai, or no, it was Darkrai, Shaman, and Arceus were just never in any of the official stuff. Like they wanted to act like they didn't exist. Like remember they did with Volcanion a couple years ago, where we all knew about Volcanion for like a year. And then they announced, like, there's this crazy new Pokemon coming out. It's a fire water type. Isn't that nuts? And we're like, oh, yeah, Pokemon. Very nuts. Very cool Pokemon. A brand new Pokemon? That's insane. How did we not know about this? Very cool. But yeah, so I spent a lot of time staring at that book and the artwork in there. So I remember that art, and I remember it being, like, kind of faded, yeah. But I wonder if he does that because like to emulate that sort of watercolor art style from before, or if he just likes desaturated colors like that. Like maybe he likes the more muted kind of tones. I don't know, but I think Pokemon look better when they're vibrant. I think because they're cartoon friend animals, and I don't know. It just sits better with me. So I've been taking some artistic liberty with the colors on this, where, like I said, I'm trying to stay on model as possible because it's sort of the point of this series. But I'm not trying to copy Sugimori's art style or anything like that. I'm kind of doing my own thing. But I'm also, like I'm sure I mentioned in previous videos, but I'm also trying to keep them pretty simple in terms of the coloring and shading, because give me some human characters, especially characters like wearing armor or any kind of complex design, and I will go nuts. Or characters with unique hairstyles or complex hairstyles, I will go nuts with shading. I'll have like fucking 4 different shading layers. But with these, sort of like when I did my monkey ball art, where with these it's like they're simple, they don't need to be overly detailed, so I try to keep their shading pretty flat and pretty, 2 or 3 tones. And then I go a little extra on the eyes just because I like that kind of shine on the eyes. I think it gives them more life. Right here, this particular pose for Blastoise, basically what happened was I drew Squirtle doing his little Power Rangers Ginyu pose in one direction. And then when I was doing War Turtle, I couldn't decide that the tail whip sprite didn't work really, or the tail whip sort of sketch didn't work out. So I went and I found a sprite, and the sprite was doing the fucking Power Ranger pose in the other direction. So I was like, oh, that's perfect. And then I wanted sort of a neutral, like a central pose for Blastoise to be in between them, because I figured this time I'd have a little fun with it and make their poses sort of work together. Especially since Blastoise is sort of a special occasion for me, since, like I mentioned, that video, my Blastoise Pokken off-model video that I made like 2 years ago has like 18,000 views right now. And I think my next highest video is like some Mobius, I think it's my Mobius Final Fantasy Lightning animation video that has like 2,000 views or something like that. So the Blastoise kind of warranted a little more attention and a little more thought. And that's why I did bother to go through and redraw him 3 times, because the second pose came out, and it was one of those, like, it was sort of a lifeless static, like, it was a little too symmetrical and stuff like that. And it also reminded me of that whoever that beatboxing guy who did the video of like Thanos beatboxing against Patrick from SpongeBob. And there's that like scene of him where he's like wiggling his fingers in front of the screen, and the Infinity Stones are turning different colors. And something about that animation just really fucking bothered me, like deep. He seems like a genuine guy, but like something about that cartoon I was like, ew, I don't like that. And that second Blastoise pose reminded me of that for some reason. Something about his face, too. And I was just like, I'm not feeling this. And so I was like, I can warrant another redo. It's important that you are not too married to a sketch. This is something that I learned from, I'm going to try not to mention the same references every time, but Plague of Gripes, I used to watch a lot of his art videos. And one thing I picked up from those was that, yeah, you can't marry a sketch or a concept. You have to be flexible, and you have to be willing to change things if they're not working, even if you really like parts of them. And it's something that I still struggle with, and that I don't like to redo things, if I can help it. But then a lot of the time what that ends up leading to is that I finish the thing and I'm not happy with it, or I'm not as happy with it as I could be. Like this fingernail right here, I did that first time, and I was like, nope, that's not good. I'm not going to like that later. So I redid it, and I actually really like how his hand came out. But yeah, you gotta be flexible in everything you do in life. And especially in art, that's how you learn. I mean, by making mistakes until you figure out what works. And I think I cut it out of this, but I drew his foot bad and then like tilted it to re-angle it so it didn't look so weird and stuff like that. So I did a lot of making sure this Blastoise would come out to my satisfaction. I also I mentioned earlier, I did his tail longer because this is the only off-model thing I did for him. I think I had the image on screen a little bit ago, but back in the Pokemon Adventures manga, there was artwork for, I don't know where it was because I started reading the manga, but I didn't get very far into it. But there was artwork somewhere where Blastoise had like a long tail like this, and I think it looks so much cooler than his normal little stumpy tail. And so, yeah, so I decided to do that just for fun, just because it's like, I'm drawing it, I can do whatever I want. If you got a problem, leave a comment down below. And if it's a nice comment, then I'll give you the big old heart so you can feel good. I'll give you that the good brain juice by hitting the love button. I mentioned it in my other video as well, but Blastoise, he's one of those weird finger kind of Pokemon. He's a weird finger Pokemon. You have the tiny turtle Pokemon, the turtle Pokemon, and the weird finger Pokemon. But Blastoise has 4 fingers in his Sugimori art up top, his old Sugimori art. Modern Blastoise has 3 fingers, and they are the claw fingers. And then in the Mewtwo Strikes Back movie, Shell Shocker and his clone both have 5 fingers. And I believe that's the only place they've been depicted with 5 fingers. But it was cool because it lets them make a little fists and they could punch each other. And so I remember thinking for Pokken that it would have been cool if he had all 5 fingers. Because, if you're already stretching him out, if you're already turning him into Lanky Kong, and if you're going to give him bad frame data and like bad projectile priority and stuff like that, like if he's going to just suck really bad and I'm going to have to pay money for him, at least give him 5 fingers. I mean, come on. What are you doing? Anyway. Yes. Blastoise he's kind of like Sonic the Hedgehog. No, wait. Don't close the video. Let me explain. He's kind of like Sonic the Hedgehog in that his design is like, you look at him and you don't think too much of him. Where you're like, yeah, he's a turtle. He's a big turtle man. He's got he's got a little square nose. He's got pointy ears. But like, when you really look at him and you really try drawing him, as simple as he seems, he's actually kind of complicated. He's got sort of a Bowser face going on a little bit. That's one of those ones where I don't know if you've ever looked at Bowser's mouth, but I've looked at Bowser's little like muzzle face thing a lot, and I'm kind of in awe of it because I don't know how they arrived at that specific shape for his mouth, because Bowser has such a specific face shape, and I'm just like, I can't imagine like how they arrived at that conclusion for him, because it doesn't look like any animal that I can think of, right? And Blastoise sort of has that kind of shape a little bit. Bowser's, it's mostly in like his jawline and his chin. But for Blastoise, he has like he's got kind of a walrus upper lip kind of thing going on. And then he has this big rectangular nose and really defined eyebrows. And then his head has like this little cleft down in the middle. And I like that cleft a lot because he gets Skull Bash. I think that was like his signature move, or one of them, back in Blue. He gets Skull Bash, and in my mind that was always like the strongest thing that because I mean he sets up for it. He hunkers down and sucks his head back into a shell, I always imagine, and then he would like rush forward and slam his noggin into you, because it's a 2-turn move, so it feels really powerful even if it's like not by today's standards. But so him having that flat kind of head always seemed like it would be more impact, and I don't know if that was intentional, because there's been a lot of talk recently of James Turner said on Twitter forever ago, apparently that the people who designed the Pokemon, at least nowadays, I don't know how it was back then, but the people who designed the Pokemon don't get a say in what their moveset is like. So that kind of puts things into a weird perspective, actually, because there's a lot of Pokemon where, like their designs are kind of like fine, or they're, whatever. But then, like, for a couple of them, their movesets actually kind of make the Pokemon for me. And it's kind of weird to think that those Pokemon, the people designing them, I mean, they might have kept those sort of moves in mind, but they didn't get to make the final decision whether or not the Pokemon has them. Like, I think it's cool that Blastoise gets Dark Pulse and all that stuff now because of Mega Launcher on his Mega Evolution, but But Sugimori didn't get to decide that, possibly. So it's very strange. And I guess that also kind of leads to why, like, Pokemon like Vikavolt, where you'd think they'd be really fast, but they're actually like slow as shit. It must just be because the battle planner looked at it and said, this is what we need for the game, whatever, or they're whatever, balancing they try to do. People like to say that there's no balancing in these games, but I mean, there's balancing in every game. You have to balance stuff or the game doesn't function properly. So, but so Blastoise's head is very strange. He's got his little cat ears and his walrus mouth and his gorilla nose, and his flat skull. And then otherwise, he has what I would keep describing as the Pokemon body type, the Pocket Monster body type. He has a big old egg-shaped body. He's got the little noodle arms. There's like two types of Pocket Monster arms, where you either have the Nidoking, like little tiny thin bicep with the gigantic forearm and the big claws on it, or you have like this sort of thing like Rhydon or Blastoise, where it's like a weird noodle with 3 segments, with the 3 little fingers on the end. And then he's got the stumpy feet on the sides, which, as I mentioned in the previous video, the way I always interpreted Blastoise was that because he's obviously Blast and Toys, he's a turtle and a tank, and so the way I always kind of envisioned him firing his cannons was that his feet, his big toenail claws are there, sort of like an anti-air or artillery gun, where those are meant to like plant him in the ground really sturdy, and then he would lean forward and brace the front half of him with his little short arms, and then that would kind of line him up properly to fire his cannons. And in Pokken, he sort of does that, But in Pokemon, there's also the issue where because he's so lanky and weird, he has an animation when he fires Dark Pulse, I think it is. It's either Dark Pulse or it's Dragon Pulse, where he actually takes a knee, like he leans on one of his knees to shoot his it's during Dark Pulse because he jumps for Dragon Pulse. But yeah, he takes a knee, and it's very strange looking. I think that's just a Pokemon thing. I don't know if regular Blastoise would do that. But one thing I want to call out, speaking of that, is I got a lot of great comments on that Blastoise video from 2 years ago. I still get comments on it every once in a while, and I appreciate everyone who comments, who takes the time out of their day. I love seeing comments. I like replying to comments. Unless they're poopy, then I don't want to see that shit, right? Just kidding. But one thing that bothered me about that video was that people kept saying, like, well, they had to make his limbs longer because otherwise he wouldn't be able to, like, run and, you know, punch and all that stuff. And the thing is that, like, they show, and I pointed this out to people, but people didn't seem to take, is that in Mewtwo Strikes Back, he runs and he punches. He does everything short of like a kung fu kick, and he does it with his little stumpy limbs. And it's not like it's not because they were saying, people would say that it was like a trick of the animation, like that, you know, his legs were moving, but it wouldn't work on a 3D model because you know, like it would make the shell stretch or whatever. I'm like, no, if you look at it, there's GIFs of it. You can see he runs and then he stops and turns his body a little bit and fires his cannon, and it works. It's not that crazy, but yeah, there are the boys, my boys, or girls if yours are female, but mine are always boys because I'm unlucky and I never get female starters. I don't think I've ever had a female starter, actually, come to think of it. Or if I did, I didn't notice. I don't notice my Pokemon's genders a lot of the time, unless it's like Raticate, the whiskers are noticeable, to me at least, probably not to anybody else, but, you know, to the ones that I care about or the ones that have various, like, defined gender differences, I notice, but in general, I could have had them and never knew. But there are the boys, the trio. And I'm actually really happy with how all three of these came out. I think Wartortle is like... I think it's the shading that I did on the tail, kind of on the top. I really, really like how Wartortle came out. And I went a little extra, like I was saying earlier, I tried to keep it simple with the shading and everything, but I went a little extra on the underlights on Blastoise. His back arm might have been a little bit too bright, but overall, I'm happy with it. So, and I hope you are too. And if you'd like to see that art, you can see it on the Twitter account I mentioned. I think it's @DesignDex1 because I accidentally didn't change the username. But if you go to, I'll leave a link in the bio or in the description. Or if you just go to my main Twitter account, Yubari Eradicate, I think you can find it from there. You might not actually be able to. I'm not sure. I'll leave a link. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. And I think that next up we're going to be doing our bug-type Pokemon. I think next is Caterpie. So hope you guys are looking forward to that. I certainly am. I'm going to try to crank these out more often. And yeah, I'll see you next time.